Emerging from the ashes of punk, British and Irish music rewrote the pop rulebook in the 1980s.
Pop acts were so popular, they reached the top of the UK charts. Then they crossed the Atlantic and conquered America too.
We really did believe that we were going to change the world.
Did you expect this sort of fantastic reception?
No. It was an amazing time. People were ready for something different.
I'm sick of seeing my face in the paper, actually.
But there was no definitive British pop sound.
The sound of young Scotland was raucous joy, the desperate desire to show off.
The social conditions of Ireland were the fulcrum of this thing that was happening.
Innovative chart toppers were being produced by artists hailing from all over the UK.
Coventry was an amazing cauldron of different cultures and different people.
Oh, nothing happens in Coventry.
Coming from Sheffield, you know, that's in your blood.
Adam and Nancy were a London band and they had to come from London.
All they wanted to do was to be true to Manchester as a city.
So we're going on a journey back in time to figure out why certain cities produce their own distinct sound.
Well, I'm actually looking forward to going back in time.
Take me with you.
You come in whether you like it or not, me.
We'll travel back to London and Glasgow via Coventry and Sheffield before stopping off in Dublin and Rhyl, finishing in Manchester and London to meet the musicians who have put their mark on the charts with sounds that could only have come from their own backyards.
The 80s, pioneering music that's still being copied today.
Felt like it was a new frontier.
It's iconic. The 80s are iconic.
This is Smashing Hits, the 80s pop map of Britain and Ireland. The 60s are hailed as a brilliant period, even the 70s are a brilliant period, but the poor old 80s gets a bit of a kicking, don't you think?
Do you mean it got a kick in then, or it still gets a kick in now?
No, I think it's perceived as a bit of a fluffy era, and it's not. You know, some brilliant music was created back then.
I don't see it like that at all, Midge.
It was a great period. It was a phenomenal period to be in a band.
When I saw you in the video for Vienna, you didn't look British. I was convinced that you were European, you know, you had this very well-groomed moustache. Was yours real, Midge? Be honest, because...
Mine was real. Mine came out of Lucky Bag. Yes, it did. You can laugh. Look at those shoulder pads. You could land a plane in those.
I'm just looking forward to this whole journey. Seeing a few faces, hopefully, that I haven't seen in quite a long time.
Hopefully recognising them.
That's true, actually.
The first stop in our pop map is London. I'm off to see a man who brought the glitz, glamour and outright oddity of an underground Soho nightclub right into the heart of the nation's living rooms. I want to know why a couple of square miles of London Soho, abandoned by Westminster Council to the sex industry and hustlers of the day, managed to deliver on the unfulfilled promise of punk.
I was there seeing one of the very first Spandau shows at the Blitz Club.
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
Well, how did I get into the Blitz? With very great difficulty.
It was kind of hard, yes.
Punk hadn't happened for us because we were too young. And the 80s were about to start. And I think our generation then, after the punk, needed somewhere to explore their own ideas.
The Blitz was a club in the heart of Covent Garden. It was organised by my old mucker Rusty Egan, who I'd been in the Rich Kids with, and savage front-of-house man Steve Strange, who we'd both later start Visage with.
A Studio 54 in London for the poor, because no one had any money. We went down these stairs, and this throbbing electronic noise was coming up. Now, you know, I'd been going to soul clubs, I'd been going to punk clubs, but this was a sound I'd never heard before. And inside were these glorious creatures that were dressed exquisitely. Cheaply. You know, Dandies on a Shoestring, I think, was the Evening Standard headline. saw these kids doing the slow jive to this pulsating electronica. There was this incredible scene, and you really felt the groundswell. There was something in this room. They believed that they were going to determine the next decade.
These Soho dandies were known as the New Romantics, but they weren't the only people attending the club.
I wasn't a new romantic, but I knew everyone at the Blitz. I was a Blitz regular. The Blitz was about colour and makeup and hair and, you know, and it was taking that Roxy Bowie aesthetic and taking it even further. Because there's not one single person in that place who was not a Bowie or Roxy fan. Because there wasn't anything else. You were listening to that or nothing.
You've got me, girl, on the run round.
Another hangout for the Soho Blitz misfits was the clothes shop in Chelsea's King's Road that ex-Sex Pistols impresario Malcolm McLaren ran with his then-wife, Vivienne Westwood. All sorts of people bumped into each other amongst the bondage trousers and bullet belts.
I went to that shop and decided this is where I want to be. I was already steeped in that world. I didn't have to make a giant leap like other people did. I didn't have any Yes albums to throw out. And yeah, she just introduced me to Adam one day in the shop. So I was just like, oh, hi, and okay, you've got a band. I think they were just called The Ants then. And then I went to see them, and they were horrible.
Early incarnations of Spandau were a bit ropey too. Initially called the Gentry, they were just another identikit post-punk operation. But inspired by what he'd witnessed at the Blitz Club, Gary rolled out his Plan B.
Here was another moment waiting to happen. And we'd had this band from school days that had been influenced by punk, playing kind of power pop. And I went straight out, bought a synthesizer, wrote everything new, 4 on the floor. I think one song carried over from the past into music that I thought would suit this scene. So we did this special show one Saturday, like a showcase.
Listen to the portrait of the dance of perfection. The Spandau Ballet.
And we were blessed by the entire fraternity.
You were embraced.
Embraced.
By the peacocks.
Blessed by the peacocks, yes.
Was minuscule. This was a big gamble for you guys.
Yes, I think we were cocksure. The 80s are coming. We are the next big thing. You know, this is the centre of London. This is Soho. So we really did believe that we were going to change the world creatively and artistically.
The first incarnation of Adam and his Ants, all pseudo-S&M and stage show schlock, were going nowhere fast. Critics hated their first album, and so in a bid to revive their fortunes, Adam approached Malcolm McLaren for advice.
So he goes to Malcolm McLaren, who has formerly managed Sex Pistols, not anymore, says, I need to buy some fame off you, Malcolm, as if he's sort of selling something out of a lorry, which Malcolm McLaren sort of was. And Malcolm said, give us $1,000 and I will give you the secret.
In addition to advising Adam to ditch the leather and embrace his inner pirate, McLaren also gave him a record by a French composer. Burundi Black made the UK charts in 1971 and introduced Britain to African Burundi drumming. McLaren thought Adam could do with hearing it too.
And Malcolm had just wanted to base a whole musical genre on Burundi Black. And all I can do, really, is to mix it all up in different ways. So that's what we did, just using the elements that was ingrained in me.
Adam did with Marco Peroni is that we are going to make hits and we want to be number one.
As Barbara Streisand presided over the UK charts, in October 1980, version 2 of Adam and the Ants would go all the way to number 4. Marco and Adam were the first of the bands to reach beyond the confines of the Soho Club and into the nation's living rooms.
There weren't any other bands like us. We were sort of on our own. The crowd loved it. They didn't throw anything, so...
There was a time before Adam, post-punk, when it was a lot of shoegazing going on. You know, there were sort of Echo and the Bunnymen bands like that that were not as theatrical.
They really crystallised post-punk. They were the ones that finished it off, really, that took all of that adventurous spirit, took it mainstream.
Because Adam had come from punk and he was saying, but we want to sell singles and we want to make pop records, he'd smashed open a door.
Within a month, in November 1980, Spandau released the same song they played to all those hip faces from the Blitz. Only by now, to cut a long story short, had a video to go along with it. And it went to number 5.
Where did it go from there?
Our first record we did at Trident Studios, and we did it. Why did we do it at Trident Studios in Soho? One, because it was a Soho band, and because Bolan and Bowie had both recorded there. So we did, to cut a long story short, it came out as a single, and we got what we wanted. We were on top of the pops. There was then an aristocracy of pop that was starting to form. But that's why I'm in a band.
Duran Duran joined that elite with a brummy take on the Soho scene.
Which one's your favourite?
And the Boy George-fronted Culture Club followed Spandau straight out of the doors of the Blitz and into the charts.
I love that shirt. I never get tired of seeing you in it.
What fueled the success of all these image-conscious bands was 2 new innovations in the pop market. Firstly, the emergence of smash hits and The Face with their new all-colour tabloid layout.
Enemy was black and white and inky and stained your hands. Face looked like a glossy magazine and treated, you know, the things I was obsessed with as if they were really serious things, like a Sunday supplement.
You don't realise how many people sat with a copy of the NME and that had smash hits in the middle, reading that instead, because it was so much more fun.
But the real artistic arms race was being fought with the moving picture.
There are no programmes to speak of on MTV, no shows with beginning, middle and ends. It's just this never-ending barrage of music.
To feed the new music platform MTV, launched in August '81, the groups became ever more ludicrous with the scale of their video ambitions.
It was that desire for status. We're better than you. You know, it's like winning a race, isn't it? The idea of the band is to go on top of the pops, sell lots of records, make lots of money, have big houses, and be famous. You must have heard of this concept.
Gradually, these videos became more and more extravagant.
I think you got to warmer places, didn't you? Get to Hong Kong?
We went to Hong Kong, but I tell you what it was about. Those videos made various statements. They were a way of saying to your audience, we're a global band.
It made a lot of big artists who wouldn't necessarily have been successful without music video. You can't picture Duran Duran without music video. You can't picture the Eurythmics without music video. You know, the list is endless, but essentially they are allied to the form, same as they're allied to the music.
What we didn't know is how much they cost. And when it was explained to Sony how much these things would cost, they weren't happy. But then again, neither was I, because we were paying for them.
And the hits just kept on coming. Duran Duran would have 10 consecutive top 10 records, 2 of which would be American #1s. And Spandau would score big with chant #1, and of course, True, the inspiration of which could not be further from London's Soho.
There came a stage when we couldn't be the hippest band in Soho because we'd done Top of the Pops 6 times. We were a national group. Yeah. So where do I go from there as a songwriter? So who are my song heroes? Well, obviously Bowie is, but more than that, people like Al Green and Marvin Gaye. And I sat down and wrote a Blue-Eyed Soul record, really, which was the True album.
So true, funny how it seems, always in time, but never in line for dreams.
And I wrote it while I was still living at home with my parents, sitting in my bedroom.
This is the sound of my soul. This is the sound.
Where was the inspiration for the lyrics? Some of it came from a book that Claire Grogan gave me.
Spandau Ballet and Altered Images were really good pals. You know, they both had 5-a-side football teams, and you know, we'd play at Bellahouston Sports Centre in Glasgow, occasionally joined by Wham or whoever else was touring. And Gary and I were really good friends to a certain extent because we were always touring and away, so we never got to see that much of each other.
And why do I find it hard to write the next line when I want the truth to be said? You know, how much do you want to put about the person you're writing the song about in your lyrics before you feel terribly exposed? So it's always hard to be honest in a love song, and True was the first love song I ever wrote.
People ask me about it all the time, and it's just like, ask Gary. It's his song.
In a way, it was a courtly song. It was about platonic love. I say no more.
Nothing conservative about the behaviour of the fans who turned up to catch a glimpse of the British group.
Thanks to endless plays on MTV, by summer '83, there were 18 British singles in the American Top 40.
Did you expect this sort of fantastic reception?
No. The rock Bible Rolling Stone magazine was forced to concede that this was the biggest British invasion since, well, the last one.
It's reminiscent of the days when the Beatles took the United States by storm.
In a lot of cases, I've actually been chased down the road by several screaming girls.
But it wasn't to last. At the height of their career, fulfilling all their pop star ambitions, the constant touring was beginning to spoil the party for Adam and the Ants. And despite 2 consecutive #1s, their demise was both comic and entirely symbolic of the era. The beginning of the end took place in London's grand old Palladium Theatre, just 4 tube stops from where Adam and Marco first met.
Your 5-year-old face is a dirty disgrace.
For Adam and the Ants, it pretty much culminates, and post-punk culminates, when they did the Children's Royal Variety.
In true seaside tradition, sandwiched between husband and wife vent act The Crankies and Rod Hull and his infuriating emu,
It's Adam and the Ants.
Adam and the Ants would take one final bow on behalf of all the Blitz dandies that had wanted to change the world 5 years previously in the basements of Soho nightclubs.
I just thought this is another thing the enemy was going to disapprove of.
Kevin Mooney's been mourning the loss of punk possibly more than most. Throws his bass guitar on the floor and continues to stand there while the 5 of them mime to the entire track.
He just broke his strap and then started dancing and didn't know what to do.
And you can see Adam being brilliant, you know, and being a star, but looking to his side going, geez, you know, what's happening? And what's happening is punk is ending right there.
We were making the statement of being there. We were sort of like desperately trying to bang as many nails into the coffin of punk as we possibly could, so it could never get out again.
By the time Westminster Council started to clean up the area in '84, get rid of the sex shops, get tough on crime, all the groups associated with those early clubs had long turned into bona fide international pop stars. But they all owe a debt to a small abandoned part of London that turned a blind eye to the comings and goings of an ambitious set of dreamers who would fashion a style of music that touched the rest of the world.
Felt like we were walking with the ghosts of Soho. You could hear the whispers of Quint and Crisp and characters like that that were still sort of walking those streets.
Adam and the Ants were a London band and they had to come from London. I think we had that arrogance, I think we had that elitism, we had that snobbery element that, you know, we are cool.
Youth culture, pop culture and place have always been hugely important, and, you know, music happens in decades, so we were the right age. This was our turn.
So Midge, be honest with me now. New Romantics.
Yeah?
Was it as moody and serious as it all looked? Or was that just a front?
Was it moody and serious?
Oh, gosh,
No, I'm not convinced it was. There was an awful lot of sucking cheeks in.
Looking back on it, it looks a bit pretentious. And especially when I look
Pretentious? What?
Yeah, but it does.
I think maybe from the outside it was perceived as that, but from the inside it was a bunch of kids who raided their granny's wardrobe.
It's true.
So yeah, and there was an element of posturing.
Yes, there was.
And you know, look at Madonna, Vogue. You know, that's what it was all about.
That's right.
You know,
That's the feeling you get from
they were
it.
doing it in London before Madonna got hold of it.
Sing it up, mister!
At almost exactly the same time as the Blitz was taking off in London, a group of multicultural teenagers were developing a beat that could never be accused of being pretentious. Ska had its origins in Jamaica in the 1960s, but its spiritual home in the UK is Coventry. It's a music I love. I was introduced to it by my Jamaican-born father. I'm in Coventry to meet a heroine of mine, Pauline Black from The Selector, to talk to her about how this movement got to the very top of the British charts. Why did you gravitate to ska?
I first became aware of ska music when I was 15. And I have the dubious pleasure, I suppose, of being because I was the only black kid in the school, of probably the only black kid in England who got introduced to ska music by white people. I grew up in Romford, and the school I went to, they had a catchment area which took in Dagenham. And a lot of the kids in Dagenham were skinheads.
Give it to me!
The skinhead subculture had first appeared in Britain in the mid-60s. Early working-class pioneers had been attracted to the swagger and music of young immigrants who brought a pre-reggae music with them from Jamaica, called ska.
They would bring in records which they would listen to on an old dance set. That's where I first heard my first ska record, and that would have been Long Shot Kick the Bucket by the Pioneers.
Originally released in 1969, Long Shot Kick the Bucket was a song about the death of a local racehorse called Long Shot. Local events like this were often the typical subject matter of ska lyrics, and someone who'd know all about this is Special's frontman, Neville Staple.
It's all I used to hear in Jamaica. From the age of 5, that's all we used to hear. Ska coming from Kingston, and that was like a newspaper. So with the ska, they used to sing about what was happening. So I just grew up listening to ska.
I was fascinated by this music that I knew nothing about, just because of the rhythm of it. There is something about an offbeat rhythm that makes you want to dance, that makes you interested in what people are saying.
Why do you think Coventry, in particular, gravitated to that sound, to ska?
Coventry is a strange place. It was bombed very heavily during the war. And on this perimeter was built factories that attracted newly arrived immigrants because there was work here. And this was like a mega hub. I mean, you could even say that it was kind of, you know, like some kind of Motown place, a motor town like Detroit had been.
You might be surprised about a very enthusiastic early adopter of this music. A local Coventry lad who I know quite well owned a record shop in the city's arcade.
Everybody went there for the records because we sort of specialised in underground records, that, you know, records that were hard to get.
It used to have all the reggae, it was reggae then, and a little bit of ska.
Neville at the Specials used to bunk off school and come and hide behind my counter when the truth officers come. More than once I've told the police Neville's not here and he was under the counter, you know.
And I used to nick the records from him.
In common with other small British cities, misfits and music lovers would all congregate in a few places that would play the music they loved.
Pubs closed at 10:30. Very few clubs were open much later than that legally. It was usually about 1 in the morning. If you wanted to drink after hours, you went to a shebeen, which were kind of illegal drinking places, usually run by reggae sound systems.
It used to be packed, filled with smoke. I don't mean like what you got on stage. The other type of smoke was filled with it.
And what you heard there tended to be not so much contemporary reggae, because most of the people running it were much older. You'd hear like ska mixed with kind of 70s reggae.
In Coventry, young people, including Neville, would frequently attend nights run by Pete, where he was the house DJ.
I've got these dancers on a Monday night, we called them toasters, that used to come on the stage and toast, you know, like what we call rapping now. And so I would play a couple of reggae records and a couple of lads would come out of the audience and they'd do this toasting.
Come with it, my rude boy! Toasting is what the Americans think they've started, but it came from Jamaica.
This a big respect to the scatter like them. Without them, man, the ska would never be alive. From Kingston, Jamaica, down to London town. Watch the rudies, them a dance to this song. You know, come in, rude boy. What you say? Check it.
Music was the catalyst, and, you know, everybody knew that the music was important.
5 and 5 say we know that is 10. Calling all the rude boys, them fi come back again.
Coventry art student and son of the Dean of Bristol, Jerry Dammers, was also obsessed with ska and was already busy creating an original British hybrid that fused it with punk.
So, and then ska came from a Fats Domino style of piano playing, which was sort of...
He had already started the Coventry Automatics, featuring Terry Hall, which Neville and Pete were both about to stumble across.
I was literally passing a pub, I think it was, if I remember right, and I heard this noise coming out the Ex-Bel Air at the back of the pub.
I heard reggae and punk mixed together. I go, oh, that sounds weird.
When I saw the Automatics, nothing can explain how different they were.
So I went and popped my head round where they were rehearsing, So is there any chance of me coming round with you guys and just to tidy your wires up and help you break down? So that's how I got in the special, to be honest with you. Just as a roadie.
What was impressive, the songs, you can sing along. And as a DJ, I've going, oh my God, that's a hit. We got to work together. Put them in a van on a Sunday. We all piled off to London, down to Berwick Street Studios, and we did a live demo, 4 tracks.
You've done too much too young, and you're married with a kid. You should be having fun with me.
I remember playing it everybody in the record industry, and they all went, don't get it, it's punk reggae.
You've done too much too young.
And I just said to Jerry, no, they're all wrong. It's so right.
Obviously, the major labels didn't think so. In a move inspired by punk's DIY attitude, Dammers decided to release music on his own record label from a suburban house in Coventry. In August 1978, the Two-Tone Project was born.
This is it. This is where we've got an office in London that does all the live work and that. This was our inspiration.
Turn the back, turn around.
Joey, the history.
Turn around, Joey.
Now, this is a record which Brad gave to me when I shared a house with Brad. He didn't like it.
Well, it's a real accomplishment to have a hit single with your first ever record release. And that is what has happened to the next band, The Specials and Gangsters.
Their first single was Gangsters, a reworking of Jamaican star Prince Buster's song, Al Capone. It would climb to number 6 in the UK charts and was the first introduction Britain would have to this Midlands musical hybrid. It was a stark contrast to Art Garfunkel's current chart topper, Bright Eyes.
Punk had lost its way slightly by then, or had become a little bit more establishment. It was new, it was different.
Next thing, they're on the front of the Enemy, and it's all going on, you know. And I had to sit and watch that as a fan.
British youths were immediately fans too. They'd propelled the Specials into the top 10 on 8 separate occasions in the next 2 years, topping the charts twice. That meant Dammers could run his Two-Tone label the way he wanted to.
No, we've got loads of contracts. Oh, this is our A&R department. These are the tapes that people send us. As you see, we've been inundated with.
One of the first bands he signed were fellow Coventry Ska devotees,
Kind of recycle, okay?
The Selector.
I was trying to set up a reggae band. This was in the back room of a pub where all people set up things. And in wandered Linville Golding out of the Specials. He said, I think you should come and meet this guy that I know. That guy was called Neil Davis. And he had an instrumental called The Selector, which had fetched up on the Specials B-side, because the Specials had run out of money and they couldn't afford a B-side. So they asked him whether he wanted to put this instrumental on the B-side.
It seemed like everything Two-Tone touched turned to gold.
The Selector, you know, have come up so quickly, like from nowhere.
People, they didn't really interested to come down to Coventry to see what was happening. It's like they hear about Coventry, oh, nothing happens in Coventry.
But lots was coming out, courtesy of Dammers' label.
It was a ridiculous rise. Our second ever gig, at which I think we supported the nipple erectors, Jerry Dammers came down and very soon afterwards offered us a 2-single deal on Two-Tone and a place on the second Two-Tone tour. And we'd played precisely 2 gigs, ever. You release a single, the single then gets in the charts, and you're on top of the pops. It was a whirlwind.
It was the start of this really industrious indie spirit. You know, the Body Snatchers only put out 2 singles on Two-Tone, but they're definitive. Two-Tone's a definitive record label.
The national appeal of Two-Tone was very much because they had amazing tunes.
Even the first Madness single was released on Two-Tone.
An earthquake is erupting, but not in Orange Street. A ghost dance is preparing. You got to help us with your feet. If you're not in
The label released 32 singles and 13 albums over its lifetime.
Jamaica, but we promise you a treat.
But despite Two-Tone's desire to unite young people from every background, tensions were never far away from the surface. Even though the tempo is up, the whole feeling of ska is up, the messages are quite deep. Why do you think that was?
We had the NF, who were openly campaigning out on the streets, and also you had a recession in this country. It was a hotbed.
There was a lot of racism out there. Your skin is the wrong colour, we do not like you. The National Front was recruiting at school gates. Racism was overt and it was on the march.
We used to get interrupted by the National Front. You'd be on stage, I'd be spitting at you. The white guys used to get problem hanging out with us, and we used to get problem because we were black walking around. They were getting it, we were getting it, both ways. What are you hanging out with that black boy for?
Then in summer '81, the Specials released a song that perfectly addressed the malaise that Dammers and the band had witnessed as they toured around the UK in the previous months.
This storm is coming out of those down. All the clubs are being closed down.
As the single climbed up the charts, Britain's streets ignited. Between the 3rd and the 11th of July, serious riots broke out across the country. Everywhere from Leeds to Leicester witnessed unrest.
Even Brixton Police Station has come under attack.
It described Coventry and it described a lot of the Midlands and the North. You know, vast tracts of the country were like a ghost town. It really did capture a zeitgeist because people were feeling desperate.
Knocking Michael Jackson off the top of the charts, on the 5th of July, Ghost Town hit #1. It was an anthem from the wrong side of the tracks, in a Britain that was very different depending on where you were brought up.
People getting angry.
That came out the summer of the royal wedding, Charles and Diana, and you couldn't see a greater contrast, really, between colourful patriotism and royalism and absolute stark black and white ska.
For all the glamour of the 80s, what most people felt was they were pressed against the glass, not allowed in to see that glamour.
NME, Melody Maker and Sounds all voted Ghost Town's Single of the Year after that explosive summer of '81. But it was the high watermark for the two-tone movement and the label itself. Within months, the Specials would split and the house of two-tone largely crumbled.
miss you.
Madness survived and morphed into a sort of Victorian music hall mashup, becoming more pop and less ska with each album release.
And I never thought I'd feel this way, the way I feel about you.
Pauline, I feel with ska, it kind of exploded, but it kind of went as quick as it came.
Yeah, I often think that musics that sort of burn the brightest and in some ways have the most to say do that, but for a very short period of time.
I think two-tone itself is its own biggest legacy because a lot of people's minds were changed.
My overriding image is probably of Neville Staples standing on top of a stack with a bunch of skinheads Zeke Heiling at him, saying, "Yeah, come and get me," and he was singing Monkey Man.
Oh, fantastic.
And that's why I'll listen to this Coventry musical export with a big smile on my face for the rest of my days.
Ska was something that kind of bypassed me. Besides hearing Millie, My Boy Lollipop in the charts and stuff when I was a kid.
The first ska song that I heard that my dad was playing, I must have been pretty young, but it was a track like ska, 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 Jamaican ska. And it was great. It was like, not everybody can cha-cha-cha. Not everybody can do the twist, but everybody can do the ska. It's a new dance that goes like this. Ska, 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 ska.
It was so far removed from what I was doing musically. It really wasn't on my radar. Sheffield was probably more on my radar, you know, because of the electronics and stuff.
Back when South Yorkshire was better known for its snooker than its synth pop, button-bashing noisenicks from Sheffield would produce music that David Bowie once described as the sound of the future. I want to know how this city gave birth to perhaps the most original sound of the decade, without a guitar in sight. So I'm meeting with synth pioneers Glenn Gregory from Heaven 17 and his bandmate and former Human League member Martin Ware.
It's like the early Human League. These synthesizers are older than us. Oh, I don't know about that. No, I don't know about that either, actually.
You don't really need more than one finger, do you, with these? It's not like a guitar.
We were really not very clever musicians.
Ooh, nice. That's kind of industrial. Yeah. Coming from Sheffield, you know, that's in your blood, you know.
So that's kind of the sound of the city.
Yeah, that's noise is in your blood.
But not for much longer after 1979. Margaret Thatcher's newly elected government set out to cut the steel industry heavily at a time of overcapacity. Despite coming to an agreement after the first national steel strike for more than 50 years, the government reduced the number of workers drastically. And Sheffield suffered more than most, leaving behind all sorts of abandoned industrial spaces. Bad for newly laid-off steelworkers, good for ambitious but skint teenagers looking for a place to create a sound for their city.
There were all these buildings that were dirty and horrible and mucky, but you could literally rent them for, I don't know, £5 a month or something, you know. So we'd moved in and lived in a couple of rooms, and then the Human League had a studio at the top. We thought we'd got some kind of like Andy Warhol factory vibe going on.
In Sheffield's old industrial quarter, Glenn and Martin would go on to manipulate sound, but not with anything that had strings attached.
This is what a timpani drum sounds like. But now, cock an ear to this. It's a synthesizer too, and this is what it sounds like. Well, that's almost perfect, isn't it?
Why the synthesizer instead of guitar? Because synthesizers weren't cheap.
During that punk revolution, Sheffield was kind of left behind a little bit, and we didn't play guitars. I think we found it a little bit old-fashioned, to be honest. It was just kind of rock and roll a little bit re-wrapped.
The scope it offers musicians in being able to create almost any sound you care to name is nearly limitless.
Brian Eno said all you needed to be a rock star in the future was a Revox 2-track tape machine and a synth. We took that literally. We thought, oh, OK, we'll do the future now then.
And then, of course, I went to London, and the next day he was like, what should we do now, then? I know, let's form the Human League.
So I got my mate in from school who got a funny haircut, and I didn't know if we could sing or not, and that was Phil Oakey.
Faced with the choice, what would you say?
If I could travel back to any moment in time, it would probably be 1980 Sheffield.
This seems the only way.
Not just to go and see the Human League, but to go and see Cabaret Voltaire, Clock DVA, I'm So Hollow, vice versa, the early roots of Heaven 17. It was all brutalist-inspired. It was fighting against something, but it was fighting against something with synths.
Stay part of the crowd.
It's hard to grasp how strange the Human League were. Phil Oakey with this really strange half-girl, half-boy haircut, a slideshow behind him. I mean, it was something that was so different from anything else that was going on.
The reason early Human League was so different was because they actually wrote a musical manifesto. 1, only electronic instruments. Did I mention they didn't like guitars? 2, no samples. And 3, no love songs. Then they set about rewriting pop history. One person who liked it from the get-go was Bob Last from Edinburgh-based Fast Product Records.
I was aware of Sheffield when the Human League tape popped through my door one day. I related it because of a big fat bass line which reminded me of Bootsy Collins. Just thought, fucking hell, that bass line's epic. And then the refusal to say anything straightforward in the lyrics was the other. It was a bass line of that.
Bob signed them to his label and would release 2 Human League singles. The second couldn't have been more on the nose about their geographical origins.
Human League themselves had a sense, which I found interesting, of themselves within that collapsing industrial blue-collar world, articulated obviously in particular by Dignity of Labour, which is probably the most industrial sounding release. It's called The Dignity of Labour, and I think everyone thought that was deeply ironic. It was not ironic, it was about the dignity of labour.
Another group from Sheffield that was emerging at the time was Vice Versa. Trouble was, the music had fallen on deaf ears. Key member Martin Fry, that's him on the left, convinced the band to take a pretty extreme musical U-turn. They changed their name to ABC and called on the services of one-time Buggles frontman and emerging super producer Trevor Horn.
They told me we used to walk around with synthesizers in carrier bags. And then we changed our mind. We decided we wanted to be in the hit parade. And we also wanted people to be able to dance to the records. I thought it was a great idea. I remember they said to me, next week we're going to be the most fashionable band in the world. And if you produce us, you'll become the most fashionable producer in the world. I was like, yeah, sounds like a good idea to me. I always like it when people have got great big ideas.
Bob Last, who was now the manager, was trying to do the same with the Human League and encouraged version 1 of the band to embrace their inner pop star.
We tried various things. You know, we did the Holiday 80 EP where we did cover versions of rock and roll and nightclubbing and...
You thought that was like really...
Yeah, I thought we were going to be #1.
Rock and roll, rock. Rock and roll, rock and roll, rock.
That's how deluded I was. And we wrote this really good song called Marianne, which I still think is excellent, and that didn't work either. And we weren't getting anywhere.
Which was pretty obvious to Bob Last too, but he had a plan, and in keeping with the times, a pretty nuclear one.
Turned up to the studio one day and they decided to chuck me out in my own band. I did deliberately split up the band.
And in splitting them up, it was definitely part of seeking pop hits.
Then it became an arms race as to see who could do best.
Martin and Glenn would go on to start Higgins 17. The revamped Human League added female singers to their lineup. Along with the newly formed ABC, all these Sheffield groups would return to their love of disco for inspiration.
We suddenly realised it's like, we're not going to parties listening to electronic music, we're listening to funk, essentially. And we're big fans of Chic, and actually at that time, disco had gone completely out of fashion, but we loved it.
But what came out, this mishmash of kind of electronics and funk was...
Oh, it hadn't been heard before.
Yeah.
Nobody had done this, nobody had made this thing before.
Higgins 17 won the race to release a record first. Penthouse and Pavement peaked at 14, but its single We Don't Need Your Fascist Groove Thing was banned by the BBC for allegedly libeling the American President Ronald Reagan. For the band, times were indeed worrying.
When we wrote the lyrics to Fascist Groove Thing, they were in response to the kind of political scene at the time, you know. It wasn't us trying to be trendy or... we were genuinely worried about nuclear attacks and we were at the rise of fascism.
I don't know whether Higgins 17 were happy in that pop sphere. So everyone else is in the pool and they've got the toe in, they're sort of feeling the water, and Boy George is going, come on, it's great! And then Nick Rhodes going, oh, I'm doing a backflip. And they've probably got sort of half submerged and then they run back out again.
If Higgins 17 were struggling to get out of pop's paddling pool, Martin Fry, alongside producer Trevor Horn, was jumping straight in at the deep end.
They wanted to make a record that was more like an American record than an English record. They didn't want like an indie rock record. They wanted a proper dance record.
They chose to take some of that smart arseness that's in music, take that out and make real pop hits. They had the glitter, the lame suits. It's the air of we need to entertain. We're coming on to be bigger versions of ourselves. That's what pop music is.
Together, the band and Trevor would throw the kitchen sink at it, becoming a kind of Yorkshire Temptations along the way.
It wasn't fashionable for like an edgy dance record from England to have strings on it. And I just wanted to do it because I didn't think anybody would have the bottle to do it. And I was pleased that they did because I thought it made it sound just a bit more, whatever, you know, better. It's disco music, but it's almost like Bob Dylan doing disco music. I wouldn't hesitate to put Martin Fry's lyrics on that record, you know, alongside Bob Dylan.
And no change at number one, so it must be the Human League and Don't You Want Me?
And of course, the newly rehashed Human League would release their opus, Dare, to stunning success on both sides of the Atlantic. Phil Oakey joked that he wanted to be the new ABBA, and by beating them to the Christmas #1 in '81 with Don't You Want Me, they kind of were.
You were working as a waitress in a cocktail bar when I met you.
What you saw was this transition from being experimental, electronic, weird, quite marginal bands to mainstream pop bands.
Now 5 years later on, you've got the world at your feet.
The great thing Phil Oakey did was choose two girls from the dance floor and made a pop band. Human League were a perfect example of we're just fed up making art rock, can we sell some records? And Don't You Want Me is a perfect example of that.
Don't you want me? You know I can't believe it when I hear that you won't see me.
Why did the Human League suddenly jump and become massive? Why did ABC suddenly jump and become massive? They went from producing themselves to teaming up with genius producers. Martin Rushton teamed up with the Human League. That created pop of a much higher level.
Heaven 17 would eventually conjure up the hit that had eluded them for so long. A track on their second album, The Luxury Gap, doffed a cap to disco and climbed all the way to number 2.
We had a manifesto with the Human League that you obviously couldn't use guitars, and really it all had to be synthesizer based, and then we just went, okay, all bets are off now.
Try to understand.